in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Aiden Yang. He's the author of The Spineless Porcupine and Senior Marketing Manager, Employer Branding at Udemy. Aiden, it's so good to see you. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you're younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that introduction, Christina. I'm Aiden Yang, as mentioned, he, him pronouns. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a film director like Steven Spielberg because I love storytelling and how films can change your perspective. I remember a poignant moment when I watched The Matrix for the first time and how it really awakened me to want to be my true self versus going along with the status quo. And interestingly enough, I found out like a couple years ago that the Matrix is a trans metaphor, according to the Wachowski sisters who produced the film. And I didn't know that when I saw it, but it just made so much sense why it resonated so deeply with me. And I like Anthony DeMello's quote about storytelling, that the shortest distance between people and the truth is a story. So that is what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I am a storyteller now. I write books and I help tell employer brand stories.
I love that. You can see the common thread today. I always think it's interesting asking people, these questions. You're telling stories now. I definitely want to ask about the one of the books that you wrote too, The Spineless Porcupine. Why our differences are our superpowers. What really inspired you to write this specific book?
Yeah, that's the book right there. And I started it in 2014. It was almost a 7-year process writing this book. And I was trying to process my journey growing up as a first generation Asian American and Christian trans man in a very diverse part of Los Angeles. And the experience for me growing up it felt like the allegory, like the analogy or metaphor of growing up in a warrior clan of porcupines, and they seemed very protective and all about keeping to our own kind. So it's very insular. And I seemed to be missing the quills that everybody else seemed to have because I didn't really want to keep my distance from other people. I didn't want to be insular. And I knew I was different, and I knew I really wanted to be around and hang out with those who were different. And so the spineless porcupine is my way. It's an allegory of growing up rejected and ostracized for being spineless. And then I went into the circus of performing and producing and perfecting as a commodity in the evangelical church. And I was speaking all over the world for their agenda, to now like exiting out of that whole evangelical church movement. And even like, a lot of my the family that I grew up with, to now like befriending in the wilderness those who I once thought were my enemies, and the ones that my family continually warned me about. Oh, don't hang out with them, they're dangerous. So the core message is all about how do we move from fear of rejection and the other into inclusion and belonging. And it's not efficient, predictable, or something we can control, which is why I use the allegory of the wilderness, because that's what it's like when you're getting to know people you've never met before and communities that you've never interacted with. And I think it's especially relevant now, given all the anti-Asian hate crimes, the Black Lives Matter movement, and even some states rolling back their protection of LGBTQ rights.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, and thank you for sharing the inspiration behind writing the book as well. I think that everybody is at a different place in their lives and careers, and really we've seen research around how it's important to embrace differences, how it's better for people to feel that sense of belonging, feel empowered, and also create an equitable place to work and an equitable world to live in. You mentioned kind of people coming together in community and groups. And I think the workplace is one of those times where you're working with folks you might have never met otherwise. And in the remote world too, you might never meet in person or you might not see on a daily basis. And some companies say, we want to embrace your superpowers, we want to embrace your differences, but we know that's not enough to have that commitment and the words. You have to have actions behind it. What is your advice for organizations to create systems and processes that really embrace employees' individual and different superpowers.
Yeah, Christina, you bring up a good point. You were reminding me of how, like, when I first came out in 2017, it was actually because I went to an employee resource group at Workday, my employer at the time, and it was a Black employee resource group. And we were talking about Black History Month and how we need to learn to embrace our varying identities. And in this conversation, it happened to be that everybody at my table represented somebody from the was either LGBTQ plus themselves, or related to somebody who is LGBTQ plus. And as they shared about like their identities and how they were embracing their uniqueness, it gave me the courage. I actually broke down crying because I was so moved to hear like people being so vulnerable about their identities that a lot of times society tells us to be ashamed of. So that moment is actually what gave me the courage to come out and befriend people who were different from me, like communities that were different from me. And actually that sprung me into now leading workshops at companies like Cisco, Oracle, and Twitch, on how to create a safe space for diversity and inclusion to abound based on that experience I had in 2017. And what I mean by safe is that it's an acronym for sharing, acceptance, fairness, and empathy for everyone. And one key way for companies to do this is to create initiatives that promote psychological safety. So how do we do that? How do we promote psychological safety in real life? Well, 2017 Harvard Business Review study found that in order for diverse teams to be successful, it requires people to feel like they can be that free to be themselves. And that is what psychological safety is. And they found there's two main factors that foster psychological safety. One is accepting differences of opinions. So the next time you're faced with a new complex situation, everyone agrees on what to do. I'll give you an example. In hiring, right? Everybody in the room is like, oh yeah, they're a great hire. Well, dig a little deeper. Anybody disagree? Like, I want to hear if you disagree, please, like, and cherish and show that you value that difference of opinion. Don't just tolerate and just go along with, okay, everybody said it's cool, but actually dig to see if there's actually more there that they might disagree. And I'll go more into this later when I talk about the Belonging, Equity, and Diversity and Inclusion Council, aka Betty Council at Udemy, that our wonderful director of Betty, Constance Wilson, started. So that's one factor, right? Accepting the differences of opinion. Second factor is accepting the new. So we all need to feel safe to try new things without fear of repercussions. We don't come up with innovative solutions unless we step out of the familiar. And I'm grateful that at Udemy, one of our core values is being courageously experimental, which means we like to take risks and we celebrate failures in service of future excellence. And, on a personal note, like, because I do workshops at a lot of different companies, I know what psychologically safe spaces look like. And that's part why I chose to work at Udemy. Like, I am openly an Asian American trans man at work. And I appreciate that I can be free and say that, and that we have a culture that is inclusive and embraces me for who I am. And I'm part of the LGBTQ plus employee resource group. I'm part of the APN, Asian Pacific Network at Udemy. And we're all about creating safe spaces for marginalized communities. And then the final thing I'll say about this, if you want to create an initiative to help foster that inclusive environment, that psychologically safe environment, is to honor stories of people who are from historically marginalized communities. When I joined Udemy back in November, we created social campaigns for Black History Month, Women's History Month, and Pride Month, where we spotlighted employees from those historically excluded communities and told about how awesome they are and their unique superpowers and stories. And when you elevate those stories, it helps everyone in the workplace, in a community, to go, yeah, like, we're actually not only tolerating difference, we're celebrating it.
Absolutely. And I think to your earlier point as well, storytelling is so important when we're talking about understanding, empathy, communication, and also when we're talking about psychological safety, really building that trust with someone as well, being vulnerable in the stories that we're telling if you are raising your hand. Thank you for sharing kind of your story as well. And I love employee resource groups, especially as a former ERG leader as well. I think the community
Yes.
that we are part of, so important. It's a huge opportunity to connect with people who you might not in the same company that you work at in different departments and learn their stories as well. I do want to talk about the other piece of employer branding and telling the story of a company that is made up of so many different stories, so many different people. One study showed that just 31% of employees say their company really offers something that is unique, and only 23% of human resources leaders expect that employees are going to stay with their kind of firm or company after the pandemic ends, whenever that is. Can you just tell me a little bit about kind of what the uniqueness is about Udemy? I know you touched on it, but I definitely want to kind of pass the mic to you to dig in a little further.
Yeah, absolutely. What makes Udemy unique is that we are truly a leading global learning company, and we value always learning and staying curious. And one great example of this is that we have U days. So one day, one whole day a month is dedicated for us to disconnect from meetings, calls, and Slack, and dedicate time the whole day to personal and professional development. And what that day looks like is entirely up to you. You get to decide, do you want to take it as a wellness and rest day? Do you want to take it as a museum visit day? Do you want to work on back burner projects? But a lot of us like to go outside. And one great example of this happened during Pride Month, just like 2 months ago. On that U Day, our LGBTQ plus employee resource group out at U did a rainbow walk in San Francisco to learn about LGBTQ plus history. And the other initiatives that I really appreciate that foster learning, like in our everyday work life, is we have this thing called Career Navigator, where biannually we have career conversations with our managers on what skills we want to develop and what we want our career paths to look like. And there's no dictation. They don't say, okay, you have to choose from these 4 paths. No, they say, the sky's the limit. What do you want to do with your career? Where do you want to go? What skills do you want to develop? And there's like, it's open field, it's white space for you to define that. The other thing that's really cool is we have an annual $1,500 learning stipend. We also have this thing called Deal Hour, which is drop everything and learn. And it's one Wednesday a month for us to take any Udemy course we'd like or learn anything we want, really. And then finally, the initiative that I really love is called Guest Voices. About once a month, we have this webinar where we have amazing external guest speakers come in and talk to us about something where we learn something new. And yes, just yesterday, we had Gabby Gifford. She's a gun safety champion and a former U.S. Congresswoman who you might have heard of. She was actually shot in a mass shooting, and she came to speak to us about gun violence prevention. And I love that, like that we're not shying away from controversial topics. We're here, we're curious, we get to learn and ask like important questions about the pressing issues of our day, like gun violence. So that's what I really appreciate. And I would say finally, what makes us unique is that we have this mission to improve lives through learning, and that we are a global destination for learning and teaching online. And we're giving people the power and autonomy to take control of their lives and their future through education. And our mission is all about we close the knowledge and skills gap, and it's really unique among SaaS companies, right? It's like we have a nonprofit mission, and we're for profit, and we're democratizing education globally. So that is what I would say really makes Udemy unique.
Yeah, I love the kind of goal and vision of democratizing education. And it sounds like you really provide the resources, walking the walk, talking the talk, and you're not making decisions for individual team members of what they want to learn about, and really opening up the opportunity, creating frameworks and non-negotiables as well for setting aside time to really lean into these resources as well. I know you mentioned a little bit about Betty earlier, and I've talked to Constance before as well, who's absolutely phenomenal. I would love to learn a little bit more about Udemy's diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of strategy and how that manifests across the organization. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Constance is amazing, and I'm glad she's been on this podcast because she's the bomb. But yeah, we have this Belonging, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council, also known as Betty, as you mentioned. And what she created was that she brought together representatives from many different backgrounds. So, they're all from all parts of our organization, like marketing people and engineering, our geographic regions like Turkey, India, Ireland, and the US. And then they're from all levels of our organization, from the CEO all the way to individual contributors. And this council of really diverse backgrounds, they're an advisory board for our executive team. And currently, they've created organizational accountability for Betty efforts. So members with all these different backgrounds and experiences meet regularly to share their ideas to form a proposal of Betty objectives and key results, aka OKRs. And then our executive team will review and commit to having at least one Betty OKR for their respective orgs. And one example is that our CEO has committed to getting our board to be 50-50 male female. So there's a real, accountability. They're following through. And I love that individual contributors are helping to set OKRs for our executives, because the people closest to the problems are often the ones who are closest and come up with the best solutions. And they're on the front lines seeing everything, and so therefore they can come up with some really great ideas. And then the other thing that I love about our Betty initiatives, I work with Taylor Nans, and she helps with our balanced recruiting. So it's a huge part of Betty, of Belonging, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, is that we have to have people from diverse companies in the company. And so she's helping to diversify our pipeline to help us hire top talent through balanced recruiting. We have partnerships with organizations like Afrotech, Lesbians Who Tech, Women in Sales Everywhere, aka WISE, and Next Play Connect, which is for Black and Latinx professionals in tech and engineering. And it's all about creating equitable and inclusive recruiting practices, starting at the top of the funnel, and diversifying our employee base at Udemy.
Yeah, that piece around that co-creation as well, not only with executives and leaders, but also leader in every sense of the word, the folks that are closest to the product, the people, the kind of problems that you're solving as well. I think that is also really important, in addition to working with external subject matter experts as well, the organizations that you talked about too, and not reinventing the wheel, and really lifting all ships there as well, creating those partnerships. We recently
Exactly.
had a webinar around with the subject matter experts too, around really celebrating trans leaders, especially in the people and kind of CEO space too. And I want to ask too, because this came up in this conversation, this question was asked as well, and asked a couple times by our audience members, in terms of how can organizations really create a workplace in a really intentional way that is trans inclusive, in terms of benefits that folks may not be thinking about, especially since we talked about too, we're seeing legislation across the US that is rolling back a lot of trans rights, and we want organizations who have an opportunity to do better to really create those frameworks.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions and ideas around this question. Um, I think the bottom line is that we treat medical leave for gender confirming surgeries the same way you treat parental leave. Like, trans medical care is medically necessary and not cosmetic. Gender dysphoria is very real. I went from being depressed for almost a decade to not being depressed for almost 9 months since I started gender confirming treatment back in October. And it's dramatically improved my work and personal life for the better. I am happier, I'm more productive, and I'm more confident. And so, if you, first of all, we should look at it as from a human standpoint. But if you're looking at it from a productivity standpoint, this is going to be beneficial to companies to really invest in creating that support for their trans employees to get the treatment they need. A practical idea I have is that, well, Udemy provides up to 16 weeks of parental leave for birth mothers. And we also provide 8 weeks of leave for fathers and adopted parents. And we acknowledge there's a disparity here, but we're currently working to address that inequity. And as somebody who will have 2 gender confirming surgeries in a span of 12 months, it will require 2 months of recovery time. And I like for it to be the norm for trans folks to take that time off for gender confirming treatment, just like parental leave, where we can receive 100% of our base salary for up to 8 weeks of leave a year. Um, the other suggestion I have, which I've seen, like I've interviewed at companies where they offer $20,000 for procedures related to transgender transitions. And this is really helpful for trans folks because we face a lot of discrimination in healthcare and our claims get denied. And I'm grateful at Udemy, we have this program called Wealthy. It's a perk where we get personalized care support to help me tackle logistical and admin tasks having to do with me and my family's medical care. And I'll give an example. Right now, they've been looking into payments for my gender confirming surgeries, and they discovered I overpaid on one of the bills, and they got me a refund. And they're currently helping me with an appeal because I got denied for an appeal of one of my gender confirming surgeries. And it's like huge that they're advocating, and fighting against the discrimination we face daily, especially with medical procedures. And the final idea I have to help trans employees is that we deal with a lot of discrimination every day. Like I cannot even tell you like how much I face in California, in the Bay Area still. And we experience a lot of emotional, mental stress and social rejection. And I'm grateful at Udemy, we have this program called Modern Health, where, and it's a vendor that you can bring in through HR to provide professional coaching to help with emotional mental health. And this past March, Modern Health offered a company-wide session called Coming Together, Support for Trans and Gender Diverse Individuals, to educate and provide resources for colleagues to help trans employees, friends, and loved ones. And this spoke volumes to me that Udemy values me and supports me as a trans person. And my professional coach that I had during my transition was a game changer. Like I met with him weekly, and he really helped me face a lot of the emotional mental stress of going through physical and emotional mental changes in having to do with gender confirming treatment.
Those are three great ways that employers and organizations, really the decision makers too, can ensure that trans employees, trans team members really feel seen, heard, and understood. And I feel like these are really great ways to highlight as well, so people can really implement them in their strategies too. Aiden, is there anything that, I know our time is ending and I can continue to ask you so many more questions, but is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to kind of highlight, or any kind of key takeaways you really hope folks bring with them after hearing our conversation today?
Yeah, I'm very passionate about creativity. I wanted to be Steven Spielberg when I grew up. So I'm one thing that I care deeply about and think is incredibly important for companies. It's not just what I think, it's been validated. The World Economic Forum cited creativity as the most vital skill for professionals after surveying CHROs and other senior executives from 371 global employers representing 13 million employees. And that comprehensive survey concluded that creativity is vital because technology is great at optimizing ideas, but companies need creative employees who can conceive those new solutions. And when you think about what's key to creativity and innovation, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, and you can argue that Apple's a pretty creative place, Steve said, creativity and innovation are the result of connecting past experiences. But if you have the same experiences as everyone else, you're unlikely to look in a different direction and think differently. And when you look at it that way, basically creativity is the mental process in which two or more dots of information connect in your mind to create a new and useful idea. And the more unique dots of past experiences you have, the more opportunities you have to come up with new ideas. And that's why it's important to have diverse experiences in the room. But having all those unique dots in the room aren't the key to creativity. You have to foster those diverse teams. And that starts with us showing that we embrace our own uniqueness first, to create a safe space for diversity around us. Dr. Brene Brown put it this way in her Netflix special, The Call to Courage, that belonging starts with belonging to yourself first. If you speak your truth and tell your story and never betray yourself for others, that's when you can create that safe space around you. When I came out as an Asian, like I'm trans, I can't tell you how much it freed other people around me to be themselves. So I would encourage you to figure out what are the unique dots you bring to the table and courageously share them, knowing that those very dots of your unique experiences are what fosters creativity and a psychologically safe environment. And when we bring all of us feel comfortable to share our true selves, that's when we can really come up with the best ideas, the best solutions, and really foster a creative, safe environment.
These are very good questions and also good points to end on, points of reflection, that self reflection as well. And I also watched Dr. Brene Brown's Netflix special and
Yeah.
on HBO too, Atlas of the Heart or something like that. And I love it. I think these are great kind of quotes and also resources. And again, really things to think about. Aiden, thank you so much for taking the time to one, share your story and also just your insights as well and your experiences with us here today on Reimagining Company Culture and for all the work you are doing and continue to do.
You're welcome. And thanks for having me.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.